Democratic presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is set to testify next week before the Republican-led House Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government regarding its role in censoring free speech online.
The insurgent candidate is expected to weigh in on the White House's attempt to censor him over his COVID-19 vaccine position and commentary, which they deemed misinformation. If you recall, RFK Jr. was personally named in a ruling federal judge Terry Doty handed down last week that limits communication between the Biden administration and social media companies. The ruling exposed how a former head of the COVID-19 response team at the White House reached out to Twitter requesting the social media company remove an anti-COVID vaccine tweet by Kennedy.
Yeah, there was a lot of that, obviously. We've seen it on Twitter. We've seen it on Facebook, all those emails from government health officials, the White House, et cetera. So here, I'll be very interested. I think we can all guess the kind of things RFK Jr. is going to say. But yes, there was evidence that his speech was among the speech targeted by the government's combating misinformation efforts. People who raised questions about the efficacy of vaccines, the necessity of vaccines for everyone. People like Jay Bhattacharya and Martin Kulldorff, who I think had milder criticisms of vaccines than Robert F. Kennedy Jr., but said it's not the case that every single person needs necessarily the COVID vaccine. That was the kind of speech that got you kicked off social media, again, at the government's behest.
Yeah.
All those meetings, all those, why isn't Facebook doing more? Remember the serial spreaders of misinformation, how it's 10 accounts spreading like 80-90% of the misinformation. RFK Jr.'s was deemed one of those accounts.
So, I think that this kind of hearing and speaking at it will generate a lot of interest online in the people who have been very focused on misinformation, obviously, as a core complaint about the Democratic Party, broadly speaking. I am curious about how this is going to play outside of the 20% or so that are interested in RFK Jr. precisely for this reason. And I bring this up because he is running as a Democrat. And while he is very visible and very popular online and in the kind of online media spaces that he's engaged with, which are, I think it's fair to say, and I don't mean this as a criticism in any way, but not especially politically left-leaning. There are a lot of people who are kind of alternative crypto guys and that kind of online space. He has sat down with people like Aaron Mate, who are more firmly on the left. But generally speaking, he's been pitching himself to a more politically independent crowd. How does he get over that 20% ceiling outside of that particular group? And do moments like this that give you a lot of public exposure, testifying at a hearing in a situation where you have been personally victimized at the core of an issue that's very important to some people, does that help him ultimately grow the share of Democrats that he needs to vote for him in the primary? Is he going to be able to expand his appeal on issues outside of kind of online censorship and COVID, perhaps more economic material issues, if he pigeonholes himself as maybe being exclusively interested in these more niche? I would argue personally that there are very important issue areas, but I think on the whole, more niche issue areas.
Right. I mean, obviously, he's going to be substantially focusing on those issues at this hearing because that's the subject of it. I think it'll be interesting to see how the Democrats handle him. I mean, I think I can guess how it's going to go because
so-called journalists.
Well, right, because we saw how the Democrats responded to very fair-minded criticism of the government's approach made by Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger, people who are also I don't know Michael Schellenberger's exact trajectory of views, but I think he classified himself as a Democrat at one point, or certainly not a conservative, saying that climate change is real, and is all that kind of stuff. Matt Taibbi, progressive journalist for a progressive magazine for a number of years, and the Democratic treatment of them was, you're basically to treat them as right-wing actors and to totally disregard the criticism they were making. This was especially coming from Stacey Plaskett, the Virgin Islands delegate, who, in between attempts to get Jeffrey Epstein to cater her birthday party or something. That was a smear, but you can watch one of our previous videos. Look for it. Where she is clearly all about trying to get him involved with her campaign financially, even at the point where it's obvious, what is well known to everyone, that he is an alleged serial abuser of underage women. She, has the audacity to suggest to Taibbi that he should be jailed for getting like a small typo, essentially, in the Twitter files. So I have to imagine they're going to handle RFK Jr. the same way. It'll be interesting, I guess, on his end if he decides to, rather than use this as a moment to litigate like the actual science of vaccines, to just kind of focus on the censorship aspect of it. But I don't know.
Oh, I have some suspicions. The thing about RFK Jr. that's so interesting and why he does so well, I think, on longer format podcasts is that his response to folks that are skeptical of his own views on vaccines is to say, okay, tell me why, let's talk it through.
Yeah.
And that is frustrating for folks in a traditional media environment because they only have the 7 minutes until commercial. And it is also frustrating for some people in a longer environment if they're not prepared to go
spend the
study
next
for
2 hours
study.
talking about vaccines, because we're going to spend the next 2 hours talking about vaccines if you really want to get him on that, because he's prepared and he's very well informed.
Right.
Even if you think he's totally wrong.
Right. So he has answers, even if you think they're wrong, and very few people who have, I think, the expertise or the time to really go through and determine what's accurate and what's not have ever really engaged with him. Mm-hmm. So what I anticipate will happen, and we will obviously follow up and see for sure, is that they will say, you were put on a list, this misinformation list, because you said X, Y, and Z that was wrong. And he will say, well, why is it wrong? Tell me why you think it's wrong. And they will say, well, this expert told me it was wrong. These authorities said it was wrong. And he will say, well, here's my pushback against those authorities and why they've missed the mark. And I suspect they're not going to want him to elaborate. They're going to try to cut him off and not let him talk. And it is going to be contentious.
Obviously, the Republicans have invited him here to do this. We're bearing the lead a little bit, despite him ostensibly being a Democrat and running in the Democratic primaries. I think it's fair to, point out the Republican interest in this is let's boost someone who is running against Joe Biden.
Sure.
But of course, Joe Biden should actually debate. He should have every opportunity to do so. He can rise to the challenge and actually take RFK Jr. on, but he's decided not to, or the Democratic National Committee has decided not to on his behalf. So here we are.
Yeah, you raise a good point. I mean, he is going to, presumably, the Republicans will let him talk ad nauseum about what his theories are. And I think liberals are going to be very unhappy with that. They're going to be very, very unhappy with that, because now here's like a huge platform for you to spread what they characterize as misinformation. They know this is coming. And so I'm also curious to see whether or not they choose to actually dig in and engage. Because to the extent that there are aspects of his argument that I think are flimsier than others, this is an opportunity for them to actually, on the public stage, confront him with what they think is the right evidence or contrary evidence to what he's looking into, and perhaps effectively constrain some of his rhetoric. Not because he's someone who himself will say, well, tell me where I'm wrong, and I'm happy to concede the point if in fact you have good evidence. If there is good evidence, this is where it could play out in a very high profile scenario in a way that is frankly productive for the broader discourse. Do I think it's likely that the Democrats are going to take that approach, as opposed to generally saying, R.F. Kennedy Jr., you are a serial misinformationist and a vaccine skeptic who is wildly indifferent to the public health interest of the average American. That being said, and
experts say that letting you continue to talk right now will kill 7.2 people every 18 minutes.
Yeah.
Imagine a nuanced, thoughtful debate on an important policy subject in the halls of Congress.
Yeah, I know people don't think that he's worth debating, and I understand the arguments that, you know, you shouldn't have to debate everybody who has an opinion on everything everywhere. But the fact of him having a platform with or without you, and people trusting and having confidence in him with or without you, should help folks that disagree with him to understand that the only way to get around this is to actually engage. That's it. You can't deplatform him out of existence. He is a Kennedy, he is running for president, and there are 1,000,001 platforms that exist independently in the United States of America and beyond that are happy to give him a fair hearing. And those platforms, frankly, have a wider reach than MSNBC does at this point.
Absolutely.
So this is your chance. And so we'll see what the Democrats make of it.
We shall see. More Rising right after this.